We are live. Hi, friends. Welcome to Be Waste Wise. In just a few seconds, I'm going to start my introduction. All right, I see the attendee count going up. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Be Waste Wise. The topic for today's webinar is climate financing for improved waste management. We have Dr. Mansoor Ali, who's a solid waste management expert, moderating today's session. He's put together this panel for us. We have Gabriela Moya Toledo, who's a principal consultant, climate finance and policy at Mott MacDonald, Lee Dowsett, lead consultant and research manager at IMA International, and Madaka Tumbo, climate finance lead and engagement manager at Adam Smith International. If you have not seen other webinars with Mansoor moderating them, please go to the webinar section on our website. You'll find them, or you can go to Mansoor's page. You'll find them there. A little bit of housekeeping. Your questions come into Q&A. We have a large number of registrations today. So introduce yourselves in chat, talk amongst yourself, add your comments, but please use the Q&A for your questions. This is going to be an hour long, and the panelists will answer your questions after their initial comments as and when it seems relevant to the conversation. Over to you, Mansoor.
Thanks, Rita, and thanks to the participants, and thanks to the panel. I think it's really key topic. We are all excited to meet you, to learn from you, and to share our experience in a recent project with you. So I'm very pleased with this panel because they're all practitioners. They work directly on climate finance issues, trainings, fundraising, and facing challenges, all that. So let me share the slide, and then we will take from there. Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay. So I worked last 15 months, specifically 12 to 15 months, I worked as the team leader for a UK aid program on waste management, and one of the components was on climate finance. We had lots of learning, very exciting learning during this phase, and Dr. Madaka Tumbo was leading that part with support from Gabby. And also before that, I was me and panelist Lee Dowsett were doing a number of training and some consulting assignments on this topic. So I myself classified not an expert on climate finance. I know more about waste management, but I learned a lot during this project, which was in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and it was a very exciting journey. So my role in this webinar really is to introduce the topic. I hope you can see the next slide. So waste management, as you probably know, most of you come from the sector or know the sector, is a fairly neglected sector in terms of the financing and funding. And there are a number of UN estimates available, which can tell you how much investment backlog is there, how much is required. So climate finance opened a window of opportunity for a neglected sector, and it's a new money. It can be targeted, and we were all very excited about that. There are so basic waste management is not going away anywhere, but I think the impact, the way we thinking about waste management, the way our narrative may have changed. So for example, when we talk about mitigation, we may be talking about reduction of greenhouse gases from food waste. When we are talking about adaptation, we are talking about improving the waste systems, and especially the impact of poor waste management in cities, in low-income areas. And then when we did this project, we also learned quite a lot how to test and how to make the cities resilient, especially the capacity building element, which is all sometimes seen only as a training, but we learned quite a lot on knowledge and capacity building to make the cities resilient to waste management. Put aside that very important part of infrastructure in waste management also can be impacted by the changing climate situation. So there are a range of considerations, and I will be very brief because panelists has got a lot of knowledge. And we picked up 3 topics for today. One of them is the role of government. Other is the reporting in climate finance, and third one is the the criteria for success. Sorry, I take some water now. My throat is bad. So I hand over to Gabby for the next part. Thank you.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. I'm Gabriela Moya, can call me Gabby. I've worked in climate finance for a number of years. Most of my career working with financial institutions, then working with governments. And what I'd like to tell you here is climate finance is a very dynamic ecosystem. What we're going to talk about here, we're focusing more on climate finance funds. You can also look at climate finance from the angle of private sector investment. We're not going to look into that here. And what I want to bring your attention to is, given this complexity and dynamic ecosystem, how can you best navigate this? And what are the key components that you need to look at before you pursue any avenue of climate funds for your projects? Next one, please. I don't know if I can change the slides.
Mansoor, I think you're sharing. You will have to move to the next slide.
I'm trying to move to the next one, so it's a bit slow at this point. Okay, oh yeah, it's doing it now.
The previous one, please.
It's too sensitive. That's it.
There.
Sorry.
Okay. Oh, something was cut on that slide. Maybe it's on the Teams channel, but there's a link at the end of that. Just to say, there's the NDC, the NDC partnership. They've got a website with climate finance funds. So this one, the Climate Funds Explorer, is a very useful resource you can look into, because you can classify and point if you know which funds are available for your country, for the sector, what are the different things that they are targeting. So I suggest, if you are not very familiar with the ecosystem, to have a look there. But here are like the 7 key components to consider. First, look at the priority focus. Are the funds looking at climate adaptation or climate mitigation, circular economy? What is the priority focus of the fund? And check what will be more suitable for the type of project that you want to have. This is a lot linking with what Mansoor was saying about the narrative. Yeah, it has to be a narrative of climate change. The funding source, is this coming from a large international fund like the Green Climate Fund, the GEF? Or are we talking about philanthropic funds, bilateral funds that are funded by the bilateral cooperation between 2 countries, like in the UK, there's the UK Pact, or it could be foundations like the Aga Khan Foundation in Tanzania. And this will also determine the different other aspects to consider as well. You've got the funding type. What type of funding are you looking for? Are you looking for grants? Are you looking for guarantees, loans with special rates, equity finance? And I think, again, depending on the type of project, it's critical to see, what type of financing instrument is more suitable and which fund will provide that. Eligibility, critical to see, are you eligible to access these funds? For some of the more complex funds like the Green Climate Fund, you'll have to look into also the accreditation component. How do you access those funds? There are accredited entities, more looking at whether, you're part of a non-Annex A country, so is your country eligible to access GCF funding? Most are, but there are exceptions. And again, there are funds that are targeting, for example, NGOs. So, it will depend really, and it's critical to look into that. Font size and complexity. This is another one, really important. The bigger the fund, the more complex. Yeah. If you are looking at GCF, you're likely to, look at 4 years or more to access that funding if you are successful throughout all the different stages. If you're looking for smaller funds from, say, philanthropic organizations, even some corporates can provide also funds. It could be less than a year. So it also depends on the size of funding. The application type. Some funds require you to, submit a terms of reference. They give you a terms of reference. You have to comply with that. They do the calls for proposals in specific time of the year. So you have to be it's really important to get close to your funding source. So if you're looking at some specific fund, you need to track, you need to engage with that organization, check when the calls for proposals are, if they are updating on their website. Some are not related to call for proposals, so they are ongoing. Others, for example, the German funds, the IKI fund, they run in a modality that's idea generation. So it's more about you, and it's similar in a way to the Green Climate Fund in the sense that you have to come up with the idea of what is it that you want as a project. And then there are different stages on the funding process to then being granted that funding. And the last one is co-financing. Many of these funds will require co-financing, and there are different modalities. Some are, in-kind contributions are good. For others, it's more than that. So it's important to understand those things right from the beginning. And in the end, always think about, these funds are for something, and it's for a project. So you have to have a good idea of what is your project in the first place. And then also you have to tailor it to the requirements of the specific fund. And I'm just gonna browse. I'm not gonna go into the details of the other slides. I think those are more like for you to look at. But what I've discussed here, it's all there as a summary. And then in the next slides, just going very quickly, Mansoor, on the next is just to give you some examples. If you go to the next slide on a table we put together about, the differences in the type of funds and the access requirements. And for example, these are the big funds run by international governments. Many, if you go to the next one, are also via, you need non-objection letters. There is a focal point in government. You have to have that relationship with those. There's a programming approach of these funds, and your project also needs to comply with that criteria. There are other funds, if you go to the next one, that are more run via a multilateral development bank. So the funding goes through the MDBs, and then the MDBs look at those projects. But there are also very good sources of funding, but then you need to be close to the multilateral development banks. And if you go to the next one, there are some examples of this IKI fund I was talking about. For example, this one is more for grants, it's for NGOs, so governments cannot be involved on this one. And these are examples. As I said, there are many other sources of climate funds that you can look at. And with that, we can go into key experiences we've learned from the project in Tanzania with Madaka. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabby. Yeah, so Dr. Madaka, it's over to you because I think we will talk about learning and we will also talk about the key role of the government, especially if you're going for larger funds, then government is quite key. So it's over to you, Madaka. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Happy to be part of this webinar and to contribute on climate finance for waste management. I'm Madaka Tumbo. I work with the Adam Smith International as climate finance lead. I'll be sharing insights and examples and experience based on the just completed Dar es Salaam Urban Resilience Program. Next slide. Yeah, for climate financing and fundraising for different purposes, especially for development projects which involves the government, it's important to make sure that government entities and departments are part of the program formulation, program design. And why is this important? It's because even when you have sourced funding without the involvement of the government, you have to be sure that you'll encounter challenges during implementation of whatever activities that you are planning to do. So it's very important to engage the government from very initial steps. And it's important because they manage access to funding, and some approvals will need government approval. Some projects might involve community engagement. You cannot just go to the communities and start engaging with them without going through their government counterparts and representatives. And for the case of scaling up for project activities and having on-ground support, it's very important to make sure that the government is part and parcel of the formulation, design, and the implementation. Next slide. So when engaging with the government and designing projects, it's very important to make sure that the idea, the activities you are trying to put it in place or forward for funding align with government priorities. And for climate financing, we have relevant government documents, which are part of the UNFCCC submissions of the government. We have the NDCs, the National Determined Contributions, and the NAPs guiding the funding. So these are the national plans which directs financial flows, and the government will look at the priorities put forward in these documents and see whether the proposal or the activities proposed respond to some of these initiatives. But for the case of waste management, the funding should make sure that all waste management related issues are within the government priorities. So apart from the climate focused government documents, things like environmental policies, the waste management policy, waste management plans, strategies should also be considered during the implementation. And recently, it has been great to learn that waste management has been recognized under GCF for both mitigation and adaptation programs, but also government documents and the upcoming updates of the NDCs also considers waste management as an important part of both mitigation and adaptation. And this has led to an increased approval chances for waste management projects because they all align with the requirements of the funding bodies, but also the government, unlike in the past where waste management issues were not considered. Next slide. So for the case of the just completed Dar es Salaam Urban Resilience Program, the key government partners and stakeholders considered for funding, we have the accredited entities. And for the case of Tanzania, we have the Vice President's Office, we have CRDB Bank. We also have multilateral organizations such as the UN World Bank. All these are accredited to GCF. And then we have the National Designated Authority, the NDA. This is the approved government agents that will screen and approve all proposals before submission to GCF. So once you have your concept note ready for submission, it has to go through the NDA. And for the case of Tanzania, the Vice President's Office is the NDA. So we also have sector ministries, environment, energy, and other sectors. And for the sake of the program we are working on, we worked with PORAC and municipals, so which are local authorities at district and local levels, which involve communities. Next slide. So for the case of flow of GCF projects through government structures, first, the project idea development is the most important part, and all stakeholders should be consulted and involved. And then the next step is the accredited entity review, because you cannot submit a GCF proposal without an accredited entity. So it is very important to also make sure that you have identified the accredited entity to work with, and the accredited entity should also be part of the project design, development, and the review. So they can also add some technical advice and refinement of the concept note, and this will increase chances of its acceptance. And the third step is NDA endorsement, where the government, the official government, approve the concept note for submission. And the submission process, this is the formal submission to GCF through approved channel. And once the GCF submission has two steps, the concept note and then full proposal. So it will go through the first review, which is concept note. Once the concept note is approved, they'll give feedback, and then there'll be a second sitting for full proposal development, which may not differ too much with the concept note. So, but it will need additional information, additional assessment, supporting documents such as feasibility studies, the environmental assessment, gender assessment, development of gender action plan, and financial and economic analysis also should also be part of the full proposal submission. Next slide. So I would also like to share the do's and don'ts, what the government can do and what cannot do, so that other partners can also understand where they sit and the role of each stakeholder. So the government can provide the political backstop through supporting and endorse the concept note, allocate counterpart for funding. So we have the NDA and the PORAC, but then we'll have the municipal responsible for that particular sector you want to work with, or a particular government department. But the government can also support, facilitate regulatory approvals, and during implementation, the most important support should be from the government. But the challenge that we have faced, but it's work in progress, always it's not easy to get timely data and information from the government. So you should make sure that you are aware of this, and for certain type of data, you have to make sure that you have done initial arrangement to get data on time. sometimes submissions and review process might not move quickly because of the bureaucracy of the government, but this is also part of their quality assurance systems of the government. So this needs to be considered, but the government cannot replace NGO or community-based organizations. So some activities need to be implemented by community-based organizations. For example, for waste management, there are a number of CBOs that works at lower levels, and they play very important part for the day-to-day activities when you are implementing a waste management project. And guarantee of funding outcomes. So the government can also not guarantee this, but it can support the process of getting funding. Next slide. Yeah, so based on our experience, when talking about stakeholders engagement, almost stakeholder platform, and how should we have an impact through multi-stakeholder engagement. So based on our experience of the Dar es Salaam Urban Resilience Program, phase 1, we had institutional and expert consultations and some individual and one-to-one meetings with different solid waste management and climate change experts. But we also visited government institutions, both in Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar, to get an overview, to get data, to get an understanding of the waste management landscape, opportunities and challenges, and get an entry point. And the second step, once we have collected this information, synthesized it, we organized for stakeholders workshop, where we had to sit with our partners in Dar es Salaam and Zanzibar, go through the synthesized information, but also review the project's component, propose the activities, and so that they can share and contribute, because these kinds of projects requires co-creation. So it was very important to work with municipals and other partners to review and contribute to the project design, activities, budgeting, and all the components of the proposal. So why is it important to engage stakeholders? Data access. So it was easier to get access of government, especially government documents, such as previous studies by other consultants. This kind of information is not always available online. So it sits on someone's office or shelf. So you have to visit, talk, and request for that kind of information. Otherwise, it was not possible to get this type of data. Next slide. Yeah, so what we have learned from the DAP, early engagement was very important, and this have helped us to make sure that all government entities are engaged from the start. But ecosystem understanding, map who approves, who are the funders, who are the beneficiaries, and what are the priorities. And there are multiple entry points, but coming up with one, you have to make sure that you engage all important stakeholders from the VPO, PORAG, and municipals, and then other partners. So throughout all this process, there are ups and downs, but so patience and understanding is very important. And this will give time for all the government processes to take place timely and get the response you want. Thank you.
Thank you, Madaka, and thanks, Gabby. So just a reminder to the participants that please continue to write your questions in the chat box. Somebody will be monitoring. I'm not monitoring at the moment because I'm trying to sort the slides out. But we have covered the access to the funding. We have also covered the role of the government based on Madaka's experience working in Tanzania. And then the next one is one of the critical elements of climate finance is the reporting and indicators. So Lee Dowsett was not directly involved with the Tanzania project, but Lee has got a range of experience in many countries on data and reporting and indicators. So I thought this is important that Lee also contribute to this webinar from that perspective. So I would like to hand over to Lee for that part. Let me just move the
Great.
slide now.
Thank you very much, Mansoor, and thank you to my fellow panelists for sharing your knowledge. My name's Lee. I do training, facilitation and support for organisations in developing monitoring and evaluation frameworks and also theories of change. Now, some of you here may be well familiar with M&E or MEAL or MEL, whatever term you use, some less so I'll give a bit of an overview. I'm also the trustee of a charity that looks to change behaviours in relation to environmental issues, but with a more positive messaging thing. Often these sorts of environmental messaging can be negative. We try and promote positive behaviour change. So I think here, along with my work on climate change adaptation projects, is my connection with Be Waste Wise, because it's such an important thing. With the charity, I think we look more at waste at point of production and point of consumer use, you know, really thinking about how and what we consume. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to give an overview of some of the key things that you'd need to have if you're applying for finance and thinking about impact reporting. So for most applications, you're going to need to show a theory of change or a logical framework, and how are you going to be measuring and showing your impact? And we need to start thinking about impact reporting immediately at the start of climate finance applications. We need to show that we know we're going to be measuring, is what we're doing going to be working? During implementation, we need to know, are we on the right track? And we need to be able to show any potential funders that we're going to be checking and monitoring what we're doing. Okay, thanks. Next slide, please. And that's done key by developing a theory of change and a logical framework. Most funders require both. I know that the Green Climate Fund, who I'll be sharing some examples with, and I know that Jeff, both require a theory of change and a logical framework. You'll have often heard logical framework as a log frame. This is our tool for planning and monitoring. Monitoring is the progress going correctly? Is it not? Do we need to make some adjustments during implementation? And a theory of change, it's kind of a presentation of logic, and it explores interconnections. You know, we're working in complex situations, in challenging environments, and different behaviours affect different components of a theory of change and how we think things are going to work. So a theory of change, it sort of shows us how and why the change that we plan is expected to happen. How and why is that change going to happen? Whereas a log frame is more focused on the monitoring and the sort of the detailed measuring of that change. So they complement each other, and they both really need to be developed, or will need to be developed, at the beginning of the interventions. Next slide, please. So different organisations do have slightly different terminologies that you need to align applications with. Don't worry about them, just get yourself familiar with them. They're often describing the similar things, it's just they use slightly different terminologies. So as an example, Green Climate Fund is looking for a paradigm shift. And so what does that mean? A paradigm shift is basically that a project or a program can really be transformative. It can really transform economies and societies to be more sustainable and resilient to climate change. So it's sort of large scale transformative processes that can be scaled up or replicated elsewhere. And a small example would be introducing sustainable transport. I mean, I know that's not small in its implementation, but just conceptually, introducing sustainable transport, that can be transformative. It can help in multitude of ways. It can help with pollution. It can help with access to markets. It can help in many different ways. So you just have to learn what the different organizations require in terms of the change that they're looking for, and make sure you align to these different sorts of terminologies. Okay, next slide, please. A green climate fund and also other funding bodies often will require that you show a pathway of change. Okay, and as I explained before, a theory of change, it shows interrelationships between outcomes and outputs. If you're not familiar with outcomes and outputs because you've not come to M&E before, don't worry, they're quite simple terms. You just make sure you align with however the organization approaches those terms. An output is what you deliver, and an outcome is the change that happens because of that output. The theory of change helps to explore project logic. So when you're exploring conceptually a project that you want to do, as I said earlier, it can be complex, there can be lots of interrelated components. You have to decide what you're going to include in your change, in your pathway of change. You can't include everything, it could be too confusing. So you need to decide what links and pathways that you're specifically going to include. And then I'm going to share an example where the pathways of change, or what it would look like in a generic sense from the Green Climate Fund. So could I go to the next slide, please, Mansoor? Go back one, yep. Should go back one. Oh, there seems to be one missing. Next, okay. So back one, please. When you've developed a theory of change and you make sure you've got the components in that the organization requires, just familiarize yourself with that. For example, Green Climate Fund, it uses co-benefits. So that would be other benefits relating to the change that you want. So although with introducing sustainable transport in a city, your main goal might be to reduce air pollution, it might mean that traffic accidents are reduced because there's less traffic on the road. So that looks for co-benefits as well. When you've got your theory of change, you go on to develop the logical framework, and that's what helps us to monitor our progress. And you'll need to be reporting on your impact periodically. Now that's done by using indicators. Next slide, please. An indicator is something that you can observe, measure, or validate in some way. So that's the generic explanation of what an indicator is. Now, they're predetermined categories of information, and they're usually expressed quantitatively. Next slide, please. They really help to show to what extent a programme objectives have been met. They help us to show what progress has been made or potentially not made and where we might need to make some adjustments. They show the extent to which targets have been met. So indicators and targets are slightly different. Your indicator is the category, and the target is where you want to get by a certain date. So often indicators can be more fixed, whereas you can adjust a target depending on how successful, or perhaps you face some other challenges along the way, so you can adjust those targets. Indicators really show that a change that you're interested in is actually happening. And you'll be designing indicators when you're designing your theory of change and your logic framework right at the beginning of your funding applications. So although we're talking about impact reporting, it needs to be considered right at the very beginning. Next slide, please. Okay, so a very, very simple and a more complex example to share of indicator reporting. So, you know, it's not difficult. There's sometimes I think M&E can be made out to seem as a very difficult process or something hard to think about. It doesn't have to be that difficult. So as an example, an indicator might be for a climate change project, number of trees planted in reforestation. The baseline would be that none have been planted yet. Then year one, you've got 5,000, year two, 12,000, year three, 20,000. And you see at each year, you can see how many new trees have been deplanted. So you could very, very easily adapt that to a waste perspective, for example, if it'd be about reduction in waste going to landfill or increase in recycling from households, that sort of thing. So that'd be an easy one to adapt to. Next slide, please. A more complex example in the sense of climate change, this is called the Composite Climate Resilience Index, and it was for an adaptation project. And this is where you combine multiple factors. to access resilience. So if you're talking about waste, you might be thinking about a few different components that come together. So I just wanted to share an example that you've got very simple indicators, and then you've got more difficult ones that bring together a number of different factors. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of the slides. So the just key thing here to remember is familiarize yourself with the terminologies that are used by climate finance bodies, and make sure you think about it at the very, very beginning, of your climate finance applications. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Gabby and Madaka. Thanks for those who submitted questions. We will be going to the questions in a minute. I've seen 4 or 5 questions coming through, so that's really great. Some of them I may be answering. Some of them will be answered by the panelists. So we still have 20 minutes, which is good. And the way we designed this webinar is to ask some questions to the panel as well. And depending on what question you have written, and we have also prepared some questions to our experts. So I will need your help, Shweta, to look at the questions as well while I'm doing the panel discussion. See if these questions can be asked now or during the discussion. So my question to Gabby is this challenge of accessing climate finance for these small organizations. We have seen that, and when we tried to have discussion in Tanzania, there were a lot of interest of a small organization in accessing climate finance, and I was very happy that you shared examples of Iki Foundation and others. So what would you suggest, Gabby, on the to the small organizations if they're interested in accessing climate finance for improving waste management or improving recycling or reducing food waste? Over to you, Gabby. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and I think this links to one of the questions in the chat. I saw someone asking about access for startups, financing for startups and SMEs. So I think a key thing to think about, again, who is it that wants access? So it's very different if you're talking about an NGO looking for funding. Is it a company looking for funding? So for example, in the table I presented there on the Iki fund, this is for smaller, and Iki has different windows. So there's the small grant window that is targeting civil society organizations, but it's really critical also to see, what are the requirements of the company, some basic things, but if you're a very small organization, you might not have like 3 years of financial accounts and other type of requirements that I think it's very important not to forget about looking into that, because you might have an entire proposal, very good proposal, but if you don't comply with that, it's going to be very challenging. My recommendation for those more like seeking smaller type of funding is really don't go for the glossy GCF type of proposals, because they are not targeting these organizations, and they're very complex. I would say have a look at others that are targeting NGOs, smaller sized, the philanthropic organizations. I think they are very keen to support a lot when working with philanthropists. You have to have more of a relationship as well. So make sure you are present to them, make sure you understand what they're trying to fund. I think those are my main recommendations. And for startups, I think it's a very different ecosystem. When you're talking about startups, there are other sources of funding. I wouldn't be necessarily thinking about the climate funds. There are seed funding, venture capital firms that are looking into this. I know specifically there are some programs that are also targeting doing the matching of the pipeline of projects with the financiers. Yeah. There are some programs, for example, the UK, the Climate Finance Accelerator. This has now concluded, and they're looking to do the Climate Finance Accelerator 2, which precisely focuses on that, is giving technical assistance to the startups on how to better, prepare for accessing funding and the requirements for equity funding. And this is what we're talking about. What are you looking for? If you're looking for equity investment, you're likely a better place to go with this type of accelerators, with the venture capital funds or the private equity funds. There are many that are targeting this. If it's on adaptation, there are some, that are also, there's a Lightsmith group, for example, in the US. They're looking more for the private equity scale, so bigger funds, rather than the startups. So just to give you an idea. And I think what they usually struggle with, these organizations, they might have amazing ideas, but these startups won't necessarily have the indicators and the rationale on the carbon emission reductions, on the adaptation benefits. How do you then present that to these type of funders that are targeting that? Is something that sometimes they provide this technical assistance for that. And there was another question I saw about carbon credits and climate finance. So carbon credits, so I would say just the carbon funds are the ones we presented that is more around, applying to these type of funding windows. Carbon credits, and you might be familiar, and especially in waste, it was very important back when there was the Kyoto Protocol and the clean development mechanism. There were lots of projects in waste around, having carbon credits. There was a lot of controversial as well with the carbon credits, then in making sure that there is additionality, that whatever you're saying it's going to be reduced is actually additional, and it's not something that was going to happen anyway. Now, with the Paris Agreement and the Article 6, it's now been approved in the last climate conference. There are going to be these bilateral exchanges between countries to do exchange of carbon credits. There have already been some trials between countries, developed countries and developing countries, to implement this. So I think for that, it's a matter of also understanding which countries are already trialing the carbon credit mechanisms. I know, Canada was active on that, Switzerland as well. So seeing also, I guess, with the government, because usually it's a bilateral agreement also between governments, but also in the end, it's between companies as well that need to do the carbon exchange. So it's trying to understand both layers to see where the real opportunities are that go beyond just the trial, and that it actually can materialize and be a source of revenue and funding for your organizations.
Thanks.
Just to say on carbon credits, something really important on my experience on the topic, you shouldn't think about the carbon credits financing as the main source of funding of your project. And this is some learning when I was working with financial institutions. We were also always thinking about this. It's more of the cherry on the top. It's going to give you an additional revenue stream. It's for all these amazing environmental reductions and carbon emission reductions, but you shouldn't target it as the main funding source of your projects.
Thanks, Gabriela. And I'm sure participants can also connect with Gabby on LinkedIn and directly ask some questions. So it's good that you have give a very elaborated answer on that. So there are a couple of questions on indicators for Lee. And I also put a question on my list about the indicators. So one is about the justification of the indicators, selection of the indicators, justification of the indicators, and how would you report indicators. I also put on my list for you, Lee, the flexibility on the indicators, how much is allowed and all that. You remember when we were doing this work on indicators, there was some were pretty tight on the mitigation side, but some were flexible. So based on that experience, I'm sure you can answer these 2-3 points together. Over to you, Lee. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So yeah, indicator reporting will depend on who you're getting your funding from. Often there will be a template that you can use. Often it depends on the timing of the program. If it's 4 years, you might have to report on a yearly basis. You'll have set up the indicators when you get the climate funding. And does an indicator have to be justified, or does the applicant have to explain how these goals to be achieved? I mean, with pretty much all funding applications, not just climate finance or waste related, you need to explain how you're going to achieve your goal. And that comes in what we call as a narrative summary and the results. So monitoring and evaluation is about measuring results. When you know what result you're going for, you develop and design the indicator. Okay, so they're closely related. It's not the indicator that's telling you how you're going to reach the goal, it's the result. The indicator is related to that. And designing indicators can be, I would go back to what Madaka was saying, it's best done with stakeholders. Co-designing indicators is really important because you get more buy-in from the data collection. You can design something where data is actually feasible to connect. Often when I'm doing trainings that involve learning about indicators, when we say, okay, where are you going to get the data from? People always say, well, government reports or government as well. They may not exist. You may not be able to access them. They may be tricky. So you want to get a mix of qualitative, more subjective and quantitative indicators. If you're not familiar with those terms, don't worry too much about them. You're just making sure you're getting data from different sources, basically, because then the data it backs itself up. When it comes to flexibility of indicators, it really depends on who you're working with. Now, sometimes there isn't much flexibility, and sometimes there is. My advice is always just spend as much time as you can in the design phase, communicating with the person or the people that you're getting your funding from, and also seeing what's out there already. Sometimes I think we've got to think of everything ourselves, and we don't necessarily. There's indicator banks out there that can give ideas. Very importantly, with indicator banks, they can give you ideas, but make sure you adapt it to fit your context. Don't just drag and drop an indicator from a UN indicator bank and go, well, that'll do. They have to be context specific or fit the context that you're working from. So sometimes there's flexibility, sometimes there's less flexibility. It'd be great if they could be refined during project implementation. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes that's why we have the targets. You can adjust the target where it could be more complex with an indicator. For me, I think it's just about really good communications. Everybody wants the projects and programs to succeed. And sometimes monitoring and evaluation is seen as like a policing function. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? But actually, it can be a hugely supportive learning function. And it can help not just project implementers learn, but funders. And we all want the same thing. Funders want to succeed. Project staff want to succeed. People on the ground we're working with want us to succeed. So if we're communicating in a really timely way, and if we've got an indicator that's just not working, we can communicate together, then that there's more flexibility or more potential for it to be adjusted to something that does fit. I'll stop there to allow for any other questions, because I could talk about indicators a lot more, because it's a big topic. But yeah, do ask any questions on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Lee. That's useful. There is one question related to you But we got another 5 minutes left. Shweta, is there any point from your side before I move to the next questions?
No, I think you can move. We have one question from Mary Jane that I see on chat. So are you going to take that? Yeah, let's go.
So we have
Academy.
to. I have one question to Madaka about government, and then we can, while we are talking about indicators, we take the same question from Mary Jane. So this question is about: is it a standard requirement to submit log frame and theory of change? I think we learned quite a lot on this, that the mainstreaming of theory of change and the contractual requirement on log frame and theory of change. So do you want to say briefly on that, Lee? So then I will ask last question to Madaka on the government part. That's
in
the
the
question.
majority,
Yeah.
So in the majority of cases, yes, it is. It is a requirement to put in through a proposal, and it is also an advantage. It's not just an advantage for the proposal; it's an advantage for your thinking as well. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean this is really key, and I'm sure we can have another separate webinar on theory of change and mainstreaming and how helpful they are or they can be. So I have one question to Madaka on the government side, because as you said, Madaka, the government is central and they can be very busy. A lot of organizations trying to reach them to get the support for their climate fund applications and financing. So in Tanzania, my reflection is that we were quite lucky in terms of the government engagement and support, but that may not be the case in many countries, especially big populations, many cities, many donors, many organizations working. So on the assumption that if the government is not engaging well, and somebody also wrote from Congo that if we have a small idea, what would you advise, Madaka, for small organizations and where the government engagement is not taking place effectively? What would you suggest? A couple of points from your side, please. Thank you, Madaka. I think you are on mute, Madaka.
Thank you, Mansoor. Yeah, it can be a challenge. You might be successful in one sector and you can encounter a challenge in another sector. So I think the best way is to make sure that you get a contact person instead of, even if it requires that you start from the high level, maybe from the permanent secretary, which is not always easy to get access to the PS of a ministry. So the best way is to start from the lower levels, which it's easier to get a normal officer that can take you through the process. And it might be easy because it worked for us very well in Zanzibar. Having little contacts and activities in Zanzibar, we were thinking, so how are we going, where are we going to start? But from the PRI, we had a waste management officer, which also supported the World Bank project. So Jaku, he was very instrumental to our project, and it was very easy for us to learn and to get access to the directors and permanent secretaries. So sometimes you need to get to understand the organization itself and get someone inside to help you navigate the bureaucracies.
Yeah, no, this is really good. Find the right leadership and find the hidden leadership. So we got another 2 minutes. I think what I will do now is to do a bit of rapid fire and one sentence from each of the panelists, right? So what would be one sentence from your side to advise our participants based on the discussion, based on the questions, and based on the topic? So Gabby, what will be your one sentence to all the participants about your topic?
I think just also reflecting on what Madaka was saying, I think it's critical to reach out to the funder or to the government in this case as well, to see what are really their priorities and have a very high elevated pitch of the type of project you are gonna be looking for. So you can, from the beginning, start adapting that concept so it also aligns with what they are expecting, because one thing is what it can be on the website, and the other thing is the internal negotiations they have with the funders, or the internal dynamics or the priorities that they might have as well. So having that early on engagement, no matter the type of funding, I think it's really critical. But you have to have an elevated pitch. You cannot just go there with a blank piece of paper. You need to be able to keep them engaged and show that you are talking about a very good potential project that they would like to follow through.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby. So go beyond the website, go under the layers. So one sentence from Lee on what you said and what participants asked.
A good theory of change can help with that pitch that Gabby
Yeah.
was just talking about, and don't be daunted by those technical approaches. They're not really difficult.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thank you. That's good. And Madaka, your one sentence to the participants.
Making sure that your idea aligns with the requirements of the funder and the government is very important. So
Yeah.
it's crucial. Yeah.
Okay, good. And my one sentence to all the participants that we are still very much in the learning territory in climate finance and waste management both. So learn and share. That's what we did try to do in DERB, and that really help us in moving forward. More you learn, more you share, it will help you in moving forward. So thanks everybody. I hand over to Shweta. We used all of our time. In fact, we are overrunning slightly. And hopefully we will be in contact through these webinars and through LinkedIn. So over to you, Shweta.
Thank you, Mansoor. Thank you, Lee, Gabby, and Madaka. For the attendees, I have dropped all the panelists, all the speakers' LinkedIn profiles in chat. So please go ahead. And some of you had questions about slides. The entire webinar is recorded. It will go up on our YouTube channel and our website, which is wastewise.be in 2 weeks. Please sign up to our newsletter. You will get updates about when everything is up. So thanks a lot for attending, and thanks a lot for all the audience interest in the topic. Mansoor, there seems to have been a lot of interest, so maybe we should think of doing something in the periphery of the topic later this year as well. Thanks so much for all the speakers' time that you've taken today. Bye-bye.
Thanks to everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.